Hello, welcome to the FMCG guys. I'm Daniel Torres, joined by Efrain Rosario. Hello, Efrain.
Hey, Daniel. Good to be with you as always.
Likewise, and excited about today's conversation about e-commerce, but specifically having somebody from the retailer side today.
Yeah, absolutely. So our guest today is Oliver Baggaley from Ahold Delhaize. And I think you'll find that he's got a really interesting background, having worked not just in retail, but having done so both in a global as well as in a regional role with companies like Ahold Delhaize, but Ocado, and then also having spent time in management consulting with Bain, and then spending some time in the tech startup world as well. So I think he's bringing a really interesting perspective to the world of retail and really thinking about how do you bring tech savvy to retail.
Yeah, and also to remind the audience that Ahold Delhaize is one of the world's largest grocers, acting in a multiple amount of countries. So you probably know one of the most famous banners, which is actually Albert Heijn in the Netherlands, but they also have a huge presence in the US, right, Efrain? I think it's especially focused on the East Coast.
It is. And actually, I think Ollie references that they've got 19 different banners that they operate under across the world, everywhere from the US to Europe to Indonesia and places in between.
Exactly. So we had a great conversation with Ollie. So we actually decided that it would be worth dividing this episode into two. On the second half, we'll be talking about customer value proposition and profitability and how this direct-to-consumer model can evolve. This will come in the coming weeks. But today, we're going to talk about how the retailer side and the industry side, the FMCG brand side, meet. Hi, Ollie. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Great to be here.
Hi, Ollie. It's good to have you. Thanks for taking time with us today.
Not a problem. Looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. I think you're joining us from Amsterdam, right?
Yeah, that's right. I've been living in Amsterdam for a bit over 3 years now. So based out here with my wife and my young son.
Excellent. How did you end up there?
Yeah, I actually moved. I moved for my previous job in a different industry. So transportation technology. This was pre-COVID. COVID put a bit of a dent in the transportation industry. So when that happens, I eventually moved back into the retail sector where I've had previous experience. We can get onto that later. But currently working for Ahold Delhaize, who are headquartered in Zaandam, so just north of Amsterdam. So I've been there since the start of 2021.
Excellent. Well, you're in a good city for FMCG and retail, obviously, and you know that from having been there 3 years. That there's obviously a lot of activity in terms of some fairly big brands as well as some prominent retailers like Ahold Delhaize as well. So it's a great place to be, albeit a bit tampered down as a result of COVID. I was there during the most recent lockdown, and it definitely has a different feel as a city than it would normally. So
it's starting to get back to normal. I had around 8 months of normality, then COVID struck, and I would say it's only been the last 5-6 months where it started to feel normal again. Yeah. Let's hope it continues.
Well, and I think one of the things that I'm really keen to kind of talk with you about today is also understanding, obviously, what impact has that had on the retail industry as well, right? So, we've obviously got the pre, during, and then the post-COVID, and that's obviously had an impact in a lot of the topics that we'll be discussing today. So anxious and eager to hear your perspective on that.
Great.
And for the audience to get a bit acquainted with you, Ollie, maybe you can tell us a bit about your background, career-wise, and what you're currently doing now at Ahold Delhaize.
Sure. So I'm currently a director of digital strategy and e-commerce at AD, and I sit in the central group strategy function. So I will provide some guidance across our different regions and across our different brands. So we're situated in the US, in Europe. We've also got a joint venture in Indonesia. So really have a global presence. And we've got 19 great local brands. What we mean by that is they have strong independence. So we as the central function are there to guide them, there to support them, but they ultimately make the decisions. So I help look after those digital and e-com topics, of which there are lots at the moment. And previously done a variety of things, but the most relevant for this conversation, I was a management consultant with Bain & Company. And my first ever case was looking at e-commerce strategy for a large UK grocer. So I was interested in this space before then, but that really accelerated my interest and understanding. After Bain, I joined Ocado, the UK-based online-only supermarket, now retail technology provider. And I was part of the commercial team selling their selling their technology to retailers over the world, including Kroger, big grocer in the States. And then, as I just mentioned before we got on air, actually came to Amsterdam outside of retail, but working for a tech startup scale up in the transport mobility space. So done a variety of things, but what really interests me is technology that has an impact on a significant number of consumers. So retail is a great place to be.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, I always like to say that in order to be a really, truly effective modern marketer, we really have to not just accept, but embrace technology as well, right? Because obviously there's the impact it's had in terms of creating new fulfillment channels, but we can't undersell the fact that the amount of influence that digital has in terms of sales that are actually fulfilled in other channels as well. So it's super interesting. I'm especially keen, maybe during this discussion, but also post discussion as well, to learn more about your time at Ocado, just because to me it's a super fascinating company. And how it's evolved from being, like you said, a retailer to really being more of a platform provider is super interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Happy to discuss. Really great company.
Absolutely. So to that point, I was going to ask, diving into to our discussion today. I'm sure our audience, given your wealth and your breadth of experience, both within the retail industry, but like you said, also in the tech startup space as well, just to get your perspective in regards to the current state of FMCG and what that means in regards to how brands are working effectively with retailers in today's world.
Yeah, I suppose that the two big topics that are probably top of mind for people in FMCG at the moment would be supply chain and then inflation. So I think on the supply chain, we're still seeing a lot of knock-on effects from COVID. I've seen recently that I think close to 5% of FMCG products were out of stock in 2022 for an average of 4 days. It's across a few Western European markets. And whenever we're getting out of stocks, it's impacting both the FMCG brands, but also the retailer in terms of lost sales and customer satisfaction. So this is definitely an issue. And despite COVID being hopefully a thing of the past, in many of these markets, we're still being affected by that backlog, but also continued COVID shutdowns in places like China. And it really illustrates how global that supply chain still is. One interesting plug to make at this point. One thing we are doing at Ahold Delhaize, along with some other big Dutch companies like KLM, ING, the big rail companies called NS here, we're focusing on using artificial intelligence to improve our demand forecasting. And you can see how that has a really clear link with improving these out of stocks with our FMCG partners, but also improving sustainability metrics like reducing food waste. So we've run a few weeks of we're calling it a challenge, where we're collaborating across these companies with some real life data to see, can we improve this demand forecasting model? And the results have been really impressive, like seeing close to 15 to 20% improvement on the model accuracy and therefore the resulting reduction in food waste. So there's some really interesting things that we as retailers, as well as FMCG, can do in this space.
And sorry, Ollie, real quick, what was the name? Is there a name for this joint venture?
Good question. It's called Kickstart AI. And there's a few press releases around that first challenge that we've done on demand forecasting. And the idea beyond that topic is getting big companies to pool their AI talents, work together, and find these, I suppose, collaboration opportunities to help the broader AI ecosystem.
Absolutely. Sounds super interesting. And like you said, I love the way that you described, that in a lot of consumers' minds, and we're all consumers on this call and our audiences as well, that COVID has kind of become, let's say, a bit of a thing in the past, although we know it isn't over by any means. And in my day job, I've seen some really interesting research that shows the level of worry of COVID versus the economy. In essence, those two curves have kind of, in essence, passed each other. So, the economy has overtaken COVID in most people's mind in terms of what worries them the most. And I think that's also the case in terms of what they're seeing in the media as well. But it's interesting because to me, it's like the supply chain issue is almost like a COVID hangover type of thing. It's actually going to carry over for quite some time.
And I think you've touched on it, that as far as consumers are concerned, it's maybe not a big worry, but I can say from a retailer perspective, it's still really top of mind, particularly. So we mentioned supply chain, but even at our own operations, we know that the labor market is incredibly tight at the moment. So making sure that we have enough labor to bring that supply in, and whether it's through the supply chain or direct to customers through e-com, making sure that we have enough capacity to match our demand, that is a continued challenge. And actually, if consumers aren't aware of it, maybe it shows we're doing our jobs, but still definitely a COVID hangover. I think the one other topic that consumers definitely will know about, which you've mentioned, is pricing. And this is definitely an area of tension between retailers and FMCG players, which has been well documented in the retail media. But there is that tension between the FMCG players wanting to pass on their costs and retailers needing to push back to make sure we're protecting our customers and ensure that only those most necessary costs are being passed on. So we don't need to mention names of retailers we've had those negotiations with. It has been documented, but I think we will continue to see some tough negotiations over the coming 6 to 12 months, hopefully no longer. But maybe one thing that consumers are less aware of is you'll have the initial food price inflation at the moment, partly through things like the Russia-Ukraine war. But then you have those secondary effects of, is there less fertilizer being used this year because of those high commodity prices? What will that do to food yields next year? And then that'll lead to more inflation. So I think it's going to be a continued challenge in the medium term. One benefit we really have as a retailer is because we have a private brands selection that we sell in our stores. It gives us a good understanding of what are those necessary costs that we're needing to pass on, and therefore helps us to have a good dialogue with the FMCG players and understand what are reasonable cost increases versus maybe just trying to protect their margins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think not to speak for all of FMCGs, but I think a lot of the category leaders have obviously are aware of this issue as well, and are in essence doing a lot of work to try to understand what we think consumer behavior, or how consumer behavior may evolve under these situations, and understanding, as you said, what is the potential impact in regards to their products and the pricing for those products as well. So obviously a top of mind topic for a lot of people in our audience, for sure.
And don't get me wrong, I think it's a really difficult situation for for all parties, the consumers, the retailers, the FMCG brands. I don't see examples of say FMCG players or retailers trying to take advantage of anyone. It's just these are the cost pressures people are under, and there's going to be some tension there.
Mm-hmm. And if we think about this tension between retailer and FMCG companies, brands, producers, what's from the retailer's perspective? What is the retailer's perspective? Like, what is the retailer's stand right now in that let's call it confrontation, to be a bit controversial?
Well, I suppose just taking a step back and thinking, what do the consumers want? And this is where we'll continue to have the shared incentives with FMCG players. But we see consumers are wanting value, first of all, but then also health and convenience. And health is another example where there's a potential tension there, because one thing we see consumers doing in these inflationary environments is down trading, either within categories or across categories. But over recent years, we've seen that elevated interest in eating healthily and increased awareness of what healthy means. And so we may see consumers unwilling, or at least less willing previously, to change their buying behavior because it might mean less healthy choices. Mm-hmm. So I think as a retailer, and we see it from FMCG players in terms of how they're manufacturing products or what products they're offering, but I think we play an incredibly important role in guiding consumers effectively. So for example, in a lot of our brands, we have recently introduced systems to help consumers understand what healthy means. In the US, we have guiding stars. In many of our European markets, we have Nutri-Score, where between A and E, we give foods a rating as to how healthy they are. There's definitely debate within the industry, what does healthy mean? But I think as a first step, it's a great guide. But we have a duty to guide consumers, but also help them not have to make a trade-off, or at least minimize that trade-off. So making sure that our healthy products are still good value. Now, one really nice example we have in Belgium, we are linking our loyalty program in Delhaize to healthy choices. So consumers who are part of our loyalty program get a 5 to 15% discount on products that are deemed healthy based on the Nutri-Score system. So that's a really nice example of how we can make sure those joint needs of convenience and value are met. And we're also seeing it with FMCG partners, making sure they're reducing the salt content, sugar content in their products. They're offering more meat-free alternatives if that's what customers are demanding. So I think there's a lot of potential opportunity to work together there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting, right? Because, you could think about that even expanding into like you said, helping consumers make healthier choices. And you're starting to see some traction in the retail industry as well in regards to making sustainable choices as well. So I know that, there have been various attempts at trying to create a similar version of the Nutri-Score for sustainability as well. And you're starting to see some of that start to pop up as well. But super fascinating to hear that, like you said, for Delhaize in Belgium, you guys have linked that to the loyalty program, which actually is a great segue to something I would love to get your perspective on, which is the role of data and insights in regards to all these topics, right? Because obviously, I imagine that your loyalty program is one potential source of really rich and deep insight into the mind of the shopper.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that is really top of mind for retailers. It always has been for FMCG, but I think FMCG brands are now starting to increasingly realize how helpful data and insights from retailers can be as we start to improve the technology that sits behind it and joining up that omni-channel shopping. And we can get into those challenges as well. But I think the most exciting thing is the amount of customer data that we have coming in. So we have over 55 million customers on a weekly basis in our shops and online. And as I mentioned, that's global. So that's US, that's Europe, that's Indonesia. And with all of these consumer touch points, we have a high reach, we get really rich shopping data, both how are they browsing online, what are they adding to their baskets, what are consumers choosing to purchase with each other, what happens when I'm browsing online, then go into store. And it's that lower funnel decision making, both online and offline, that I think is really, really interesting for us and our partners. What I would just preface with up front is data privacy is also incredibly important. I think we'll come back to this triangle of consumers, retailers, and FMCG throughout the conversation, but we see that privacy as incredibly important, not just in Europe, where you have the strong GDPR framework, but also just from a moral and ethical, even I suppose PR point of view. It's incredibly important that we are protecting our customers' data to the utmost standards wherever it is. Plus, we're seeing the legislation in the US moving in the same direction as Europe. So I think it's a sensible thing, even from that point of view, to be using our European experience in the US. So everything I'll say around data and insights, and we can give some more examples about how we're using it with FMCG. Just preface it with the consumer data is anonymized, processed ethically, and privacy is at the forefront.
What is the lower funnel? Sorry, you're mentioning the importance of the lower funnel.
So I think what I mean by that is if I can place an advert, a relevant advert to a consumer on our website, if we pick a one local to me in Amsterdam, so Albert Heijn, if I'm a consumer browsing on Albert Heijn's website, I'm looking at particular products to add to my basket. In the consumer's minds, I am planning to purchase something maybe that day, and we can talk about instant or same day delivery later on. That's definitely a big trend. But sometimes it can be, I have the intent to purchase this day, this hour, what can I buy? And we then give FMCG companies the opportunity to put their message in front of the customer at that purchase point. Whereas more upper funnel marketing might be around just getting the brand in front of the consumers on a billboard outside, on TV. That's incredibly important. But in terms of converting that view to an action, we see a much greater correlation with that lower funnel marketing activity. I think it's particularly interesting for FMCG as we're seeing changes in the broader digital marketing environment around a cookieless future. So making sure that consumers are opting in to have their cookies tracked across different websites. It's reducing the ability of players like a Facebook to help an FMCG player follow a consumer around the internet to really understand, if I'm showing an advert here, what's the eventual impact? Within the realms of protecting consumer data, because we have that loyalty card that's linking customer accounts with purchase behavior, that's a really interesting proposition. And just to give one great example here in the Benelux. So in both the Netherlands and Belgium, in addition to Albert Heijn and Delhaize, who are our two big grocery brands in the region, we also have bol.com. And for those listeners who don't know, bol.com is the number one non-food digital marketplace in the Benelux. So an Amazon equivalent. Amazon is in our market, but a long way behind Bol. We've been here for a long time. We really understand the market, both from a consumer and a merchant point of view. And the reason why I mentioned that from a data and insights point of view is we can be that one-stop shop for FMCG players. And we see, when we look at our customer bases, there's a significant amount of shopping overlap. Food can give you that frequency, but then a non-food marketplace gives you that breadth of potential products that consumers could be interested in. And so we're increasing that collaboration between our brands, food and non-food, to create an ecosystem. Everything from, to give one tangible example, this year, you can order online on bol.com, but then pick it up in a locker in our supermarkets where you might be going later that day anyway. But things coming down the pipeline would be single sign-on, cross-marketing opportunities, cross-selling. So I could be on my Bowl accounts, the non-food digital marketplace, and start shopping food within that. So there's lots of exciting opportunities for customers, and then consequently FMCG as well.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, how would you contrast the preferences of FMCG companies and retailers in this omni-channel environment right now? Like, what are the the key differences or similarities?
Yeah, so I suppose taking a step back just to focus on our view, and then let's link in FMCG and see how it compares. For us, we really look at it as omni-channel. So our customers will shop where they want to shop. We can obviously influence them and do try to, but if we're not offering, if a customer wants to shop in store and we're not offering a convenient store for them, they'll go elsewhere. If our digital online experience is not as good as a pure player, they'll go there. So we need to be where the shoppers are, but we do still see real value in making sure a customer can shop across these different channels. The obvious split is offline and online, but then digital is a great way of linking them. For example, I can do things from browsing to using my loyalty cards to payments on my phone, even when I'm in a store. And so the smartphone can really be that linchpin between the offline and the online shopping experiences to give this seamless digital experience without using too many buzzwords. And we see when we
use them already.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe it's the right podcast for
well,
doing
no,
that.
and you'll see that we try to call them out too, because there's a part of our audience for whom some of these words are.
Yeah, no, it's a fair.
No worries at all.
My family are come from a medical background, so doctors and nurses, and I remember sitting around the dinner table not being able to follow half of what they said because they talk in acronyms. I'm guilty of it too at times. So yeah,
recruitment is also full of acronyms, and so no worries at all.
Yeah.
But just on omni-channel, and by that we mean it can be offline, can be online, can be a new channel, could be the metaverse. But we see when we get customers to shop with us, regardless of the channel we're offering, we see a big uplift in spend. And so that's really our goal, to make sure we can offer that for them. I think likewise, FMCG have the same mindset and think, okay, as consumers are going online, what opportunities are there for us? And so particularly a few years ago, it's obviously still going on, but I'd say rose in potential popularity a few years ago is the direct-to-consumer push. And can these big FMCG players with strong brand affinity with consumers just cut out the retailer and go straight to them? And I think particularly on things like, let's take diapers, so a regular recurring shop, a strong brand like a Pampers, can they get consumers to come directly to their websites? Can you entice them with better promotions or some kind of convenience like a recurring service and get them to shop there? I think there is some value in that, but what we see as a retailer is consumers still value that one-stop shop. They don't really want to be fragmenting their shop over 10, 15 different FMCG players. Plus they value, and this is a big trend, they value the range of new brands that are popping up, those local brands, the brands that are tapping into new trends that maybe traditional players haven't quite caught up with yet. So I would say while FMCG has tried to go to that direct-to-consumer route, I think more recently it shifted to how can we best operate on the new online channel that retailers are offering. So to pick two examples, with our FMCG partners who go through our grocery channels, do they need to adjust their packaging? Because maybe consumers are, both consumers, but also the retailer perspective, maybe we don't want to be shipping large bulky items and we'd rather sell smaller pack sizes, or your packaging doesn't need to be built to look attractive sitting on a store shelf, because we can do that with a digital display. We can make it as attractive as you like. Instead, packaging needs to be designed for sustainability, being lightweight and sturdy on that journey, and taking up as little space as possible. So that there's been adjustments through there. Where I think direct to consumer and the retailer worlds do come together is through our marketplaces. So Bowl being our big example, and how, as well as having our one party sales, so the traditional route of we have the stock, we sell it to consumers. We also offer third-party marketplaces, which is the fastest growing part of our business. Within the digital marketplace industry, and we see it across other retailers too. But that's tapping into the desire of big FMCG to sell directly to consumers. And we're helping them with that consumer traffic, but also giving them space on the website to tell their story. So making sure there's enough real estate for, we've already given examples of that lower funnel, so close to purchasing decision marketing, but also giving space for FMCG to tell more of that just broader branding story.
Yeah. And actually that's what I was gonna say is that I think the savvy FMCG brands recognize that you really can't have a one channel or a disparate channel approach when it comes to something like D2C. I think, kind of tying it back to your comments around the funnel, right? A channel like D2C can play a role, not just, like I said previously, like as a fulfillment channel, but it can also serve as a top of funnel type of activity. In regards, like that becomes a place where a consumer shopper will go to find out more about the brand and to learn more, and to really for more of that storytelling element that may be fulfilled through that D2C channel, or it may end up being fulfilled through a marketplace, like you said, or it may end up being fulfilled in store as well. I mean, that again, I think why digital is so interesting is that it's bringing the entire funnel almost together, and that I like to say that the gap between when somebody is in a consumption mindset or let's call it more of a learning mindset, discovery mindset, to when they're ready to buy is really, really narrow, right? Because it can happen in an instant. So really, really interesting to see what you guys are doing in that area.
And we have seen a shift in the last few years where 5 to 10 years ago, the big brands were quite reluctant to go on these third-party marketplaces, partly because they thought, well, we can try and do it ourselves and therefore don't need to share any of the revenue and profit. But I think also around, we want to have full control over that messaging to consumers. Now what we're seeing is, firstly, they often feel there's incremental benefit to being on these marketplaces. And it's not an either or. You can do both, and you can try and incentivize people to say, find you on a marketplace, but do the eventual shop on your own native website. That's more than possible. But also, we as a retailer notice the desire to tell that brand story, and so are getting more sophisticated at giving brands the space to do that without bombarding the consumers with too much information or taking away from what we ultimately want of consumers making a purchase. So there's always that tension between, you don't want to add too much content to the website and therefore create some friction there. But I think more and more we're getting the balance right.
Yeah. And I think it ultimately, it's like, it's an old adage, right? The right message in the right place at the right time. So I think, whatever touch point you're talking to, it's really about how do you nail that.
This was Oli Baggaley from Ahold Delhaize, part 1. Very interesting part 1. I think that's partly why we decided to divide this episode into 2. What are your conclusions of this first part, Ephraim?
I think hopefully our audience as well. I found this super interesting. I think Oli shared a lot with us, not just in terms of what's top of mind for retailers today in regards to supply chain as something that's actually carried over from the COVID times to the more recent situation with the war in Ukraine, but also economic uncertainty. But I thought it was really interesting to hear him talk about the impact that supply chain and truthfully the COVID situation has had, not just in terms of out of stocks, but also in terms of things like the labor market and the fact that they had to retailers had to ramp up significantly in terms of being able to find people to fulfill orders. And now, how are you adapting that post-pandemic? And then from an inflation standpoint, similarly, how are retailers and FMCG brands thinking about pricing and understanding how consumer behavior and their spending habits will evolve as a result of that? So for me, like I said, lots to take away from this discussion. I also was really interested to hear him talking about the collaboration that Ahold Delhaize is doing with non-competitors around demand forecasting, Kickstart AI. So I'm definitely going to be checking it out and would encourage our listeners to do so as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Any point that you think would be worth underlining about, especially from your perspective, Efrain, of the relationship between FMCG and retail that you think is worth noting?
Yeah, to me, I think it's the key takeaway, and I think this is consistent with my thinking, and I think a lot of my colleagues' thinking, is the spirit of collaborating, right? So I think, as I said in response to Ali, the magic really happens when you're able to, in essence, combine the richness of the data that a retailer can bring and the knowledge that a retailer can bring around the moment of choice with what FMCG brands can bring in regards to their understanding of consumer motivations and desires and drivers around their category. And I think when those two things come together, a lot of really interesting things can happen, not just with regards to how you think about your own category, but as Ali mentioned, thinking beyond your category in terms of how you interact across the total basket or across the total trip.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks as always, Efrain, as well for your takeaways, and thanks to our audience for listening to us again. It's great to have this project. We really enjoy it. So enjoy your support. If you ever want to contact us with suggestions, let us know. And finally, a shout out to our sister podcast, the CPG guys over in the US, who are delivering bi-weekly, as far as I'm concerned, amazing content. And on top of that, are building a great community of different podcasts and content creators around.
Absolutely. I would say, definitely check out some of their new podcast partners as well, the CPG Scoop and the Omnichannel Minute as well.